All right. Hi, guys. Today we are going to start our next unit on cells. So this unit, we're going to be just looking at cell structure and a bit how they function. And then next unit, we're going to focus on the cell cycle. So I've kind of chunked all the cell information in two groups. Today's content should probably be review. A lot of you have looked and learned about like cell organelles sometime one of your years in middle school, depending on which track you're on. First, you're going to be, using this note packet. So this should be under your under resources for this new unit, and the note document is called 2020 Cell Notes Packet. So it should look something like this. Remember, you should be following along, and we're actually going to go in this video, we're going to go through the next few pages. So we're going to do a quick introduction on cells, the history of cells, and just some basic stuff. And then we're going to really get into the nitty-gritty today on looking a bit further in on all of the organelles that are found within our cells. So that is the first 3 pages of your notes packet. So the first thing we're going to do today, like I said, is just take a look a bit at the history very quickly. And I'll tell you, truthfully, on the air test, one of the standards is really just that you have this broad understanding of all of the scientific research and discoveries and honestly failures that kind of go into the scientific world as we know and understand it today. And the understanding of cells, the discovering, the identification of cells is just a perfect example of how science actually works. So first of all, remember that a cell is the basic unit of all life forms. So we're going to really learn about our entire bodies, for example, are made up of all of these tiny little cellular units. So a lot of scientists work together to discover cells. We'll talk about just a few, but we must remember that there were many more that we don't even know about, and along the way, a lot of scientists that failed or whose hypotheses were proven totally wrong, which, as we know now, you should know now, is kind of the nature of science. So back in 1665, Robert Hooke was the first to coin the term cell to describe the little chambers or like the funny little sections that you see in cork. In 1674, Anton von Leeuwenhoek was the first to view living microorganisms in a drop of water. So he was the first one to have a tiny drop of water and actually identify that there were tiny little organisms living in that drop of water. In 1838, Schleiden concluded that plants are composed of cells. 1839, Schwann concluded that animals are then composed of cells. And then kind of the last important one here is Virchow, which claimed that cells come from existing cells. So take a moment, write in all those names. And so after years of research, scientists have come up with this cell theory that states 3 things. Number 1, all living things are composed of cells. Number 2, cells are the basic unit of structure and function in living things. And 3, all cells are produced from existing cells. So in the next couple units, we'll get pretty familiar with cells in our body, some of them that reproduce really quickly, some of them that maybe never reproduce at all, or if ever, very rarely throughout our entire lifetime. And skin cells are one perfect example of a type of cell that just reproduce really, really quickly. So we are just constantly shedding skin cells and creating new skin cells. So about 30,000 dead skin cells fall off per minute, resulting in about 8.8 pounds of dead skin cells falling off your body each year. Over 8 pounds of just skin cells falling off your body each year. 80% of household dust is just dead skin cells. There's some, obviously, some images through a microscope of skin cells. Okay, so remember that cells are made up of these 4 things. These should look familiar to you. So cells are made up of carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids, which is what we focused on all last unit. So here we go, we're tying it all together. Keep in mind that cells vary greatly in size. So most cells are microscopic, which means you cannot see them with just your naked eye. But many cells are quite large. So a chicken egg that you might have for breakfast is actually just one cell. So like every egg is just one cell. You can see the image here. That's an ostrich egg. And that's one cell, and you can see how massive it is. So in this unit, we usually do, some of you may have done it before, but in this unit, we usually do a 3-day lab, really stinky 3-day lab where you, every group gets 3 chicken eggs, like just regular eggs from the grocery store, chicken eggs, and we soak them in vinegar until the hard shell dissolves. And then we have this really squishy cell membrane, and that is one cell. So we actually plop it in 3 different solutions and watch it over a couple of days, and it's a great lab. But it's interesting that you know you can hold one cell, one huge chicken cell, in the palm of your hand. Cells can vary greatly in shape. So depending on their function, the shape of their cell is going to be reflected. So you can see there's some different examples of types of blood cells, surface skin cells, bone cells look really funny. Muscle cells even differ depending on what type of muscle cell it is. So cells vary in size and shape. But all cells, every single cell has a cell membrane which surrounds the outside of the cell and cytoplasm. We'll talk about both of those later here in just a little bit. There are 2 types of cells. So there are eukaryotes and prokaryotes, and all cells fall into one of these 2 major classifications. So first, let's take a look at eukaryote. So eukaryotic cells are complex cells that have a nucleus and lots of organelles, which makes them complex. Eukaryote cells can be unicellular, meaning like the whole organism is just one cell, or multicellular, like us. So we are a multicellular eukaryote. So examples of eukaryotes are all animals and plants. Not all plants, but all animals and most plants. There's a microscopic view of some eukaryote cells. Those are plant cells. You can tell because they're green. In the shape of them, you'll see. Another example of eukaryote cells are human skin cells. So there's some skin cells under a microscope. Normally, we'd be doing a microscope lab in class, and you'd take a little toothpick and just gently scrape the side of your cheek and put that on a microscope slide and dye them blue. And it would look really similar to the picture on this slide. You can actually see your very own cheek cells and the nuclei like you can see in those cells. There's some horse bone cells, kind of pretty. Koala blood cells, red blood cells. Dog intestinal cells. And then prokaryotes. So prokaryotic cells are very primitive, very, very simple cells that lack a nucleus and lack organelles. All prokaryotes are unicellular. Meaning that the entire organism is just one cell. So all prokaryotes are just one cell, one-celled organisms. Examples of prokaryotes are bacteria. Here's a picture of some prokaryotic cells, and this happens to be E. coli. So you've probably heard of E. coli. This is streptococcus cells, which causes strep throat. Salmonella, probably familiar. Both E. coli and Salmonella are bacteria that are known as foodborne illnesses. So basically, they give you food poisoning. Lactobacillus is the bacteria found in yogurt. So this is actually a good bacteria. There's lots of really good. Most bacteria actually is good. We have billions of bacteria on and in our body right now that we actually couldn't live without. So not all bacteria is bad for sure. There's another picture, or here's a good diagram that just kind of depicts the structure of the two different types of cells. So you can see the eukaryote here on the top has a nucleus, and then all of these pretty distinctive organelles we'll talk about in just a little bit. And then the prokaryote cell down here is much different. So it doesn't have a nucleus and it doesn't have the organelles. Okay, so I'm going to keep moving on to your next page of notes. We're going to take a closer look here at the cell structure. So remember, keep in mind that eukaryotic cells are way more complex with the nucleus and lots of organelles. And then the prokaryote cells are much, much simpler. So eukaryotic cells are complex with nucleus and organelles. So this includes plant and animal cells. All eukaryote cells have a cell membrane. The cell membrane is a thin, flexible barrier around the cell that regulates what goes in and what comes out of the cell. We'll learn a lot about the cell membrane. And then within the cell is cytoplasm. And so cytoplasm is just all of the stuff inside of the cell membrane. The cytoplasm consists of cytosol, which is a jelly-like material that surrounds the organelle. So it's kind of like, if you picture your cell, I think of cytosol as like kind of like the jelly-like juice surrounding, like within the cell and surrounding all of the organelles. Cells have vesicles, which are just small storage sacs, basically, and they can move materials throughout the cell. The cytoskeleton is a big interconnected network of protein filaments within the cytoplasm that help the cell maintain its shape and movement a little bit. We'll kind of see that later on. So cytoskeleton is basically the cell's skeleton. Organelles. Literally, the term organelle means little organs, and that's exactly what they are. Organelles are these specialized structures that perform a specific function. The nucleus controls all the cellular processes. The nucleus is where our DNA is stored, our genetic information. Almost all the time, our DNA is stuck nice and secure inside our nucleus. But we will learn during the cell cycle times that the DNA actually can come out of the nucleus, but you'll see it's very rare. The nuclear envelope is the special membrane around the nucleus that controls basically flow of material in and out of the nucleus. So think of the nuclear envelope as kind of like the protective layer around the nucleus. The nucleolus is found within the nucleus. So if you look at this image, this whole purple thing, this whole big purple circle is the nucleus. And then within the nucleus is actually what we call the nucleolus. And the nucleolus's #1 priority is to make ribosomes. It just makes ribosomes all day, every day. Chromosomes are thread-like structures that contain our DNA. And usually you will see the shape of a chromosome referred to as an X. So if you look at this image here on the right, this is like obviously a microscopic, a real life image of a chromosome shaped like an X. And the X's are shaped differently depending on which chromosome it is in our body. We'll take a look at that next unit again as well. The mitochondria are known as the powerhouse of the cell. For some reason, you guys always remember this one. You know this. So mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell, and so they produce energy. What we'll also learn is that actually, like in our cells, how our cells produce energy is a process called respiration. And respiration, we think of respiration as breathing, and it is kind of tied to it, but essentially respiration is happening in our cells, and it's taking food energy from the breakfast that I just ate and turning it into ATP. And ATP is just a form of energy that our cells can actually use. So the process of respiration is actually taking food and producing ATP to fuel our cells. And then you'll see later on that the byproduct, like one of the products, is carbon dioxide, which we exhale. So essentially, respiration is very much tied to our breathing, but that's not actually the process that we normally refer to here in biology. Within the mitochondria, so you can see they're kind of like roundish, ovally shaped organelles. And within there, they have a really important structure called the cristae. So the cristae are like the weavy inner folds that greatly increase surface area for chemical reactions to occur. So the whole point with that cristae is to increase surface area with which respiration can occur, so that one mitochondria can produce as much energy as possible. So it's interesting because cells that require more energy in our body are going to have more mitochondria. So for example, muscle cells are going to require way more ATP, more cellular energy than other cells, so they have more mitochondria. Sorry, I'm going to go back to the mitochondria. So for example, like our muscle cells are going to have lots and lots of mitochondria versus, maybe like our skin cell. Our skin cells need energy, and they'll definitely have mitochondria, but probably like just a fraction of the number of mitochondria. We do get our mitochondria from our mother. Ribosomes. So remember, we already mentioned this word. Ribosomes are formed by the nucleolus. And then what the ribosomes actually do is they make proteins. Last unit, we talked about proteins. And so now you understand the importance of proteins and that they're in charge of almost every cellular process proteins are in charge of. Ribosomes can be free floating, so just literally floating throughout the cell in the cytoplasm, or they can be attached to the rough ER. And we'll see that here in just a sec. So the endoplasmic reticulum, or often referred to as the ER, is a system of tubes and sacs with lots of surface area. And there's two types of ER. So we have the rough ER and the smooth. And really, what makes the rough ER rough is that it's studded and covered in ribosomes. So if you look at this image on the top, this is endoplasmic reticulum, but it is covered in ribosomes. So all those little black little dots are just ribosomes. The rough ER builds and then moves proteins. And the smooth ER you can see down here, it looks really similar to the rough ER, except it doesn't have ribosomes. And so it literally just lacks the ribosomes on its surface. The smooth ER builds lipids for our bodies and also helps with detoxification. Lysosomes are small sacs that digest waste. They contain enzymes, remember the word enzymes, that break down waste. So I think of lysosomes as like the garbage disposal of our cells. And the lysosomes are, I think, my favorite organelle. The Golgi apparatus is a stack of membranes that process and package proteins. So remember, proteins are made by the ribosomes, but then the Golgi apparatus here is going to basically get them and process them and package them, puts the final touches on them, make sure they're just right, and then sends them to their final destination, wherever proteins are needed. The Golgi apparatus, you can see in this like microscopic image here, it really does just look kind of like a stack of plates. Vacuoles are sac-like structures used for storage. So if I think of vacuoles as just kind of a big open space and it can store lots of things. Vacuoles are most common and most prominent in plant cells, actually. So the vacuoles in a plant cell, plant cell, they can store water, salts, proteins, any materials that need stored. A vacuole can just store those materials. In some plant cells, there's a vacuole that can contain a poison to protect against plant-eating animals. So like an example of that would be actually like milkweed. So milkweed, you've probably heard about, but the beautiful monarch butterflies, as an adult butterfly, they eat, in their caterpillar form, eat milkweed. Other animals, though, become sick by milkweed. So there's this milky substance. And so, for example, that milky substance is going to be stored in a vacuole. If you look at this image on the bottom left, this black and white picture, you can see the brick-like structure. So the rectangular ones, those are plant cells. Oftentimes, plant cells look like a brick wall to me. So you can see they're usually rectangular or square shaped. And then you can see the huge vacuole filled with water. If you've ever seen a plant that looks really wilty and thirsty and maybe dying, what's actually happening on a cellular level, you guys, is this vacuole is just slowly losing water. And so eventually, if this big old bubble, you can imagine, loses its water, this whole cell begins to literally squish and lose structure, and then the whole plant becomes wilty. So when a plant is wilty, it's literally wilty on a cellular level. Pretty cool. So some special cell features, and I call them special because not every cell has these. So cilia, for example, some cells will have cilia, which is short hair-like projections that is used for movement. Again, just present on some cells, definitely not all. Another example of a special cell feature used for movement is a flagella. So I think the most common flagella you probably have heard of or seen are sperm. So sperm cells definitely have, usually one flagella that helps them move. Some cells you'll see, like this image here, they can have multiple, like some cells have lots of flagella actually to help them move. Plant cells have a cell wall. So both plant and animal cells have a cell membrane, and a cell membrane is a really flexible membrane. Plant cells, however, always have a cell wall. So this is located outside of the cell membrane, and it provides strength and protection, and this is made of cellulose. So remember cellulose, we talked about this as being a carbohydrate an important carbohydrate last unit. You can see in the image on the bottom left here, so you can see like the thick green cell wall produced of cellulose. Chloroplasts, another one found in plants. So chloroplasts are found in really any organism where photosynthesis occurs. It contains the chlorophyll, so this is where we're going to see the green coloration. And the chlorophyll is the green pigment that is used to capture the light energy. If you look at the bottom, well, actually, let's look at this picture on the bottom left. So you can see this is a picture of plant cells under a microscope. And again, normally we'd be doing this with looking under cells, plant cells, like you'd make your own slide. I'd go out and buy aquatic plants, and you'd make your own little slide and actually look at like the like little circular clumps almost of which are the chloroplasts. So keep in mind that plant and animal cells share a lot of things. So like almost every organelle is present in both animals and plants cells. The two things that are only present in plant cells are the cell wall, which remember is a rigid cell wall, the chloroplasts, which is where photosynthesis occurs, and then the vacuoles. So remember, vacuoles are sometimes present in animal cells, but primarily found, like lots of vacuoles are really important in plant cells always. And I think that's it. Okay, that's it. All right, so now you should have just completed your third page of notes already. So that was quick and easy. As always, let me know if you guys need help with anything.